The silence stretched across the Afghan desert like a held breath. In the pre-dawn darkness of forward operating base Chapman, 8 Navy SEALs crouched behind concrete barriers, their night vision goggles painting the world in shades of green death. The mission was supposed to be routine: extract a high-value target from a compound 12 clicks north. But routine had died 3 minutes ago when their radio crackled with a voice that shouldn't exist. Mongoose 6-1 to ground team, I have eyes on your position. Team leader Chief Petty Officer Marcus Tank Rodriguez felt ice crawl up his spine. Mongoose 6-1 had been shot down over Kandahar 18 months ago. The pilot was listed as KIA. Yet here was that same call sign, that same voice, clear as Sunday morning across the tactical frequency. Say again, aircraft, Rodriguez whispered into his mic, his voice barely audible over the desert wind. Mongoose 6-1, A-10C Thunderbolt II, approximately 2,000 feet above your position. Request permission to provide close air support. The other SEALs exchanged glances through their goggles. Petty Officer Jake Morrison, their communications specialist, was already scrolling through his digital manifest. No air support was scheduled. No friendlies were airborne in their sector. The closest A-10 was supposed to be at Bagram, 200 miles southeast. Above them, invisible in the darkness, the distinct growl of twin turbofan engines painted lazy circles in the sky. The sound was unmistakable, the low, menacing rumble of the Warthog, the flying tank that had saved countless ground troops since the Gulf War. But this particular Warthog shouldn't exist. Rodriguez made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Mongoose 6-1, this is Groundhog Actual. Identify yourself. The pause lasted exactly 17 seconds. Morrison counted them on his watch, each tick marking time in a universe that had suddenly stopped making sense. When the voice came back, it carried an edge of something that might have been amusement or might have been sadness. Groundhog Actual, Mongoose 6-1 is Lieutenant Colonel Vesper Ghost Nakamura, call sign earned the hard way in the Koringal Valley. Serial number. Well, that's classified above your pay grade, Chief. Rodriguez felt his blood pressure spike. There were only 3 people in the entire theater who knew his rank wasn't officially supposed to be announced over open channels. 2 of them were dead. The third was sitting in a bunker in Kabul, probably asleep. Mongoose, we show you as, Rodriguez started to say deceased, then caught himself. In the darkness, his team was already moving, their training taking over even as their minds struggled to process the impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Vesper Nakamura had been one of the most decorated A-10 pilots in theater before her final mission. The mission that had turned her call sign from Phoenix to Ghost. The mission that had supposedly ended when her aircraft disappeared into a sandstorm over the Hindu Kush. The mission she was apparently still flying. The first rule of special operations is that the universe doesn't care about your disbelief. Rodriguez had learned this lesson in Fallujah, then again in Marja, and now he was learning it again in the pre-dawn darkness of Afghanistan's Nangarhar province. Above them, the impossible A-10 continued its lazy orbit, waiting for permission that Rodriguez wasn't sure he had the authority to give. Mongoose 6-1, what's your fuel state? Morrison asked, his voice professionally neutral despite the fact that he was essentially conducting a conversation with a ghost. Sufficient for mission requirements, Groundhog. I've got a full loadout, 8 AGM-65 Mavericks, full 30 Mike, and enough fuel to loiter until sunrise. Question is, do you need the help or not? The answer was yes, absolutely yes. Intelligence indicated their target compound held at least 15 Taliban fighters, probably more. The SEALs were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating without backup because some desk jockey in Tampa had decided that air support would be excessive force for a simple extraction. But accepting help from a dead pilot, flying a non-existent aircraft raised questions that Rodriguez wasn't equipped to answer. Questions that could end careers, destroy reputations, and land everyone involved in a very uncomfortable room with very serious people asking very hard questions. "Mongoose standby," Rodriguez said, then switched to the team's internal frequency. "What do you think, boys?" The responses came fast and quiet. "I don't care if she's Amelia Earhart, Chief. We need the firepower. Ghost was good people when she was alive. Still sounds good to me. Fuck it, sir. Dead or alive, an A-10 is an A-10. Rodriguez made his second decision of the night. "Mongoose 6-1, Groundhog Actual. We are about to initiate movement toward target building Alpha. Request you maintain overwatch and engage any hostiles that present themselves as threats to our advance." "Copy, Groundhog. Mongoose 6-1 is cleared hot. And Chief, go ahead. Tell your boys to keep their heads down. When I start shooting, things get messy." The A-10's engines grew louder as the aircraft descended, and Rodriguez could swear he saw the faintest outline against the stars. The distinctive silhouette of the Warthog, built around its massive GAU-8 cannon like a flying gun with wings attached as an afterthought. Vesper Nakamura had earned her original call sign, Phoenix, during her first deployment, when she'd brought her damaged A-10 home on one engine and half a wing after taking concentrated anti-aircraft fire over the Helmand province. The aircraft had been so shot up that maintenance declared it a total loss, but Phoenix had walked away without a scratch. She'd earned Ghost on her last mission, the one that supposedly killed her. Now, 18 months later, she was back. The compound sat like a concrete tumor against the mountainside, 3 buildings connected by high walls and razor wire. Through his scope, Rodriguez could see the heat signatures of at least 12 fighters moving between positions. Their intelligence had been conservative. This was going to be a fight. "Mongoose 6-1, Groundhog Actual. I count 12 tangos in the open, probably more inside the structures. Can you confirm?" Above them, the A-10 banked slightly, and Rodriguez imagined Ghost adjusting her targeting pod, painting the compound with invisible laser designators while her aircraft's sophisticated sensors counted warm bodies and weapon signatures. "Groundhog, Mongoose confirms 15 tangos in the courtyard. Estimate 20 to 25 total. I'm seeing PKM positions on the north and south walls, possible RPG teams on the rooftops. This isn't going to be easy." Morrison keyed his radio. "Mongoose, this is Groundhog 2. What's your recommended approach?" The pause was longer this time, and when Ghost's voice came back, it carried the weight of hard-earned experience. "Groundhog 2, I suggest you approach from the west. There's a blind spot in their coverage about 50 meters from the main gate. I can suppress the heavy weapons with the cannon while you move. Once you're in position, breach on my mark." It was a solid plan, the kind of tactical thinking that had made Vesper Nakamura one of the most respected close air support pilots in theater. But it was also exactly the kind of plan that Ghost would have recommended, and Rodriguez found himself wondering whether they were dealing with a supernatural phenomenon or simply a pilot who'd somehow survived her supposed death. Either way, it was still the best plan they had. "Copy, Mongoose. Groundhog team, you heard the lady. We move in 60 seconds. The SEALs began their approach, 8 shadows flowing across the desert like water. Behind them, they left their doubts and questions. Ahead lay the mission, and the mission was all that mattered. Above them, Ghost adjusted her grip on the A-10 stick and began her attack run. The GAU-8 cannon, officially designated the Avenger, held 1,174 rounds of 13 depleted uranium ammunition. Each round weighed nearly a pound and could punch through tank armor like paper. Against human targets, the effect was decisive. "Groundhog Actual, Mongoose 6-1 beginning my run. Keep your heads down and stay out of my line of fire. This is going to be loud." The first burst from the Avenger sounded like the world ending. The GAU-8 cannon fires at 3,900 rounds per minute, which means that in the 3-second burst that Ghost delivered, 195 rounds of 30 death hammered the compound's north wall. The concrete exploded in chunks, sending the PKM team diving for cover that no longer existed. The distinctive BRRRRAP of the Warthog's gun echoed off the mountains like thunder. "Holy shit," whispered Morrison, watching through his night vision as the entire north section of the compound simply disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. "Groundhog, you are clear to advance. North wall is neutralized." Ghost's voice was calm, professional, as if she hadn't just erased 3 enemy positions with surgical precision. The SEALs moved fast, covering the 50 meters to the breach point in less than 30 seconds. Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes from inside the compound. The survivors were regrouping, preparing for the ground assault they knew was coming. "Mongoose, Groundhog is at the breach point. We're taking fire from the main building." "I see them, stand by." This time, Ghost came in low and slow, the A-10 appearing like a mechanical angel of death against the star-filled sky. Rodriguez caught a glimpse of the aircraft as it passed overhead, the familiar twin-engine, twin-tail silhouette that had become synonymous with salvation for ground troops worldwide. But there was something wrong with this particular Warthog. The paint scheme wasn't quite right, and there were markings on the fuselage that Rodriguez couldn't quite make out in the darkness. Most disturbing of all, the aircraft seemed to shimmer slightly, as if it weren't entirely solid. "Groundhog heads down, danger close." The second burst from the GAU-8 was even more precise than the first. Ghost walked the rounds across the main building's facade, punching holes through concrete and steel like they were made of cardboard. The return fire stopped abruptly. "Building cleared. You're good to go, Groundhog." The breach and clear took 8 minutes. The SEALs moved through the compound like a choreographed dance, each man covering his sector, while the team flowed from room to room. They found their high-value target in the third building, exactly where intelligence had predicted. But they also found something else. In the main building, scattered among the debris from Ghost's cannon fire, Morrison discovered a collection of photographs. Combat photos, showing A-10 pilots posing with their aircraft. And there, in a frame that had somehow survived the carnage, was a picture of Lieutenant Colonel Vesper Nakamura standing beside her A-10. The aircraft in the photograph was identical to the one currently circling overhead. Except for one detail. The photograph showed blast damage along the fuselage, scorch marks from anti-aircraft fire, and a section of the left wing that had been crudely repaired with sheet metal and rivets. The extraction went smoothly. Too smoothly, Rodriguez thought as they loaded their prisoner into the helicopter that arrived exactly on schedule. Above them, Ghost maintained her overwatch, the A-10's engines a constant, reassuring rumble in the darkness. "Groundhog Actual, this is Mongoose 6-1. Package is secure and you're clear to exfil. It's been a pleasure working with you boys." Rodriguez hesitated. There were protocols for this situation, debriefings, reports, official inquiries. But there were also unspoken rules in the special operations community, rules about loyalty and trust, and the things that happened in the dark places of the world. "Mongoose, Groundhog Actual, where are you headed after this?" The pause was so long that Rodriguez began to think Ghost had already departed. Then her voice came back, softer now, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with tactical communications. "Home, Chief, finally going home." "Copy that, Ghost, safe travels." "See you on the flip side, Groundhog." The radio went silent. Above them, the A-10's engines began to fade, the aircraft climbing toward the stars until the sound disappeared entirely into the vast Afghan night. Rodriguez found himself staring upward long after the aircraft was gone, wondering if he'd really heard what he thought he'd heard in Ghost's final transmission. The helicopter ride back to Chapman passed in relative silence. The prisoner sat hooded and zip-tied, occasionally shifting in his seat but otherwise offering no resistance. The SEALs cleaned their weapons with methodical precision, each man lost in his own thoughts about what they'd witnessed. It wasn't until they were back on the ground, processing their captive and completing the preliminary paperwork, that Morrison approached Rodriguez with the photograph he'd recovered from the compound. "Chief, you need to see this." Rodriguez studied the image under the harsh fluorescent lights of the debriefing room. Lieutenant Colonel Vesper Ghost Nakamura stood beside her A-10, her helmet under her arm, a slight smile on her weathered face. The aircraft behind her was definitely a Warthog, but the tail number was clearly visible, 790123. "Run this tail number for me," Rodriguez said to Morrison, gesturing toward a computer terminal. Morrison's fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing the Air Force's aircraft database. The results appeared within seconds, and Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. Aircraft 790123 had been shot down over Kandahar 18 months ago. The pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Vesper Nakamura, was listed as killed in action. The aircraft was declared a total loss. But according to the database, the wreckage had never been recovered. The debriefing room at Fob Chapman smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. Major Sarah Williams, the intelligence officer conducting their after-action review, had been asking the same questions for 3 hours, and Rodriguez was getting tired of giving the same carefully neutral answers. "So you're telling me that an unknown aircraft provided close air support for your mission, using the call sign of a deceased pilot, and none of you thought to question this during the operation?" "Ma'am, with respect, we were focused on the mission. The aircraft was effective, professional, and helped us complete our objective with 0 casualties. The pilot's identity was secondary to our immediate tactical concerns." Major Williams consulted her notes, her expression skeptical. And this pilot, who claimed to be Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura, demonstrated intimate knowledge of close air support procedures, proper radio protocols, and effective target engagement. "That's correct, ma'am. Chief Rodriguez, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've investigated ghost sightings, UFO reports, and soldiers who swear they've seen Elvis driving a Humvee through Tikrit. But this," she gestured at the mission report spread across the table, "this is different." Morrison shifted in his seat. "Different how, ma'am?" "Because every detail of your story checks out, except for the part where it's impossible." Williams opened a classified folder and spread its contents across the table. Satellite imagery, radio intercepts, electronic warfare data. The evidence was comprehensive and undeniable. At 3:47 hours, military satellites detected an A-10C aircraft operating in your mission sector. The aircraft's transponder was broadcasting till number 790123, which officially doesn't exist anymore. Radio intercepts confirm tactical communications between this aircraft and your team. Most interesting of all, electronic intelligence shows that the aircraft was painting targets with a laser designator that matched the weapon impacts you observed. Rodriguez studied the satellite photos. There, clear as day, was the distinctive shape of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, frozen in time by military surveillance technology. "So it was real," Morrison said quietly. "The aircraft was real. The question is how and why, and what happened to Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura after her aircraft was supposedly destroyed." Williams closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "Gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Lieutenant Colonel Vesper Nakamura was one of our best pilots, but she was also working on something that made a lot of people very nervous." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Ghost wasn't just a pilot, she was a test pilot. The classified briefing room was a sterile white box buried 3 levels beneath Fob Chapman. Major Williams had been replaced by a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself only as Smith. the kind of generic pseudonym that screamed government intelligence. Gentlemen, what you witnessed last night was the culmination of a black project that officially doesn't exist. Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura volunteered for an experimental program designed to extend the operational capabilities of close air support aircraft. Smith activated a holographic display that showed a cutaway view of an A-10 Thunderbolt II. But this wasn't any ordinary warthog. The interior was filled with technology that Rodriguez didn't recognize. The Lazarus program was developed to address a critical problem in modern warfare: pilot fatigue and the psychological stress of repeated combat missions. The solution was to create a neural interface that would allow experienced pilots to continue flying missions even after physical limitations would normally prevent their continued service. Morrison leaned forward. "You're talking about uploading someone's consciousness into an aircraft." "I'm talking about creating a symbiotic relationship between pilot and machine that transcends traditional limitations. Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura was our most successful test subject." The holographic display showed brain scan images, neural pathway maps, and data streams that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. Ghost's final mission wasn't a combat operation. It was a field test. She was supposed to return to base after 8 hours of flight time. Instead, her aircraft disappeared into a sandstorm and was never seen again. "Until last night," Rodriguez said. "Until last night," Smith agreed. "The question now is whether what you encountered was Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura, an artificial intelligence created from her neural patterns, or something else entirely." Rodriguez thought about the voice he'd heard on the radio, confident, professional, but carrying an edge of something that might have been sadness. "She sounded human to me." That was the point of the program, to preserve not just the tactical knowledge and flying skills of our best pilots, but their humanity as well. Smith deactivated the holographic display. "Which brings us to why you're here." The room fell silent except for the hum of ventilation systems and the distant rumble of aircraft engines on the flight line above. "We need you to make contact with her again." "Sir, with respect, we don't know how," Morrison protested. "She found us, not the other way around." Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura, or whatever she's become, has been appearing sporadically across the theater for the past 18 months. Always at night, always when ground forces are in trouble, always providing close air support with surgical precision. But she's never stayed long enough for us to establish meaningful communication. Smith pulled up another display, this one showing a map of Afghanistan marked with red dots. 17 confirmed sightings, 34 enemy positions neutralized, 0 friendly casualties. Ghost has become the most effective close air support asset in theater, and she's not even officially alive. Rodriguez studied the map. The pattern was clear. Ghost appeared wherever the fighting was heaviest, wherever ground forces needed help the most. "What do you want us to do?" "We want you to bring her home." The next mission came 3 days later. Intelligence indicated a Taliban weapons cache hidden in a cave complex near the Pakistani border, defended by an unknown number of fighters. It was exactly the kind of high-risk, high-reward operation that would normally require significant air support. Air support that command had conspicuously failed to authorize. "It's bait," Morrison said as they prepped their gear in the armory. "They're using us as bait to draw Ghost out." "I know," Rodriguez replied, checking the action on his rifle for the 3rd time. "Question is, are we okay with that?" The team exchanged glances. They'd been together for 2 deployments, through firefights in 3 countries and situations that would have broken lesser men. But this was different. This time, they weren't just soldiers, they were part of an experiment in resurrection. "Ghost saved our asses the other night," said Petty Officer Danny Chen, the team's medic and demolitions expert. "If she wants to talk, we owe her that much." The others nodded. Whatever Ghost was, human, artificial intelligence, or something in between, she'd proven herself in combat. In the special operations community, that was the only credential that mattered. The insertion went smoothly. Too smoothly, Rodriguez thought as their helicopter dropped them at the landing zone 12 clicks from the target. The night was crystal clear, with the kind of star-filled sky that made the war seem very far away. They'd been moving for 40 minutes when Rodriguez's radio crackled. "Groundhog Actual, Mongoose 6-1. I see you down there, boys. Looks like you're walking into another hornet's nest." The familiar voice sent a chill up Rodriguez's spine. "Mongoose 6-1, Groundhog Actual. Good to hear from you again. What do you see?" "Cave complex at your 12 o'clock, approximately 800 meters. I count at least 20 tangos, heavy weapons, the works. This isn't going to be a walk in the park." Above them, the A-10's engines painted their distinctive signature across the night sky. But this time, Rodriguez was ready. He pulled out a pair of military-grade night vision binoculars and tracked the aircraft as it passed overhead. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. The A-10 was definitely real. He could see every detail of its construction, from the distinctive nose art to the weapon pylons beneath its wings. But the aircraft itself seemed to glow with a faint, ethereal light that had nothing to do with conventional navigation systems. And there, in the cockpit, he could see the silhouette of the pilot. Lieutenant Colonel Vesper "Ghost" Nakamura, flying her final mission for the rest of eternity. The cave complex was a fortress carved into the mountainside, with narrow passages that twisted deep into the rock and firing positions that commanded the entire valley. The Taliban had chosen their position well. It would take a full battalion to dig them out through conventional assault. "Mongoose, Groundhog Actual. Recommend we abort and call for heavy air support." Ghost's laugh crackled over the radio, carrying a mixture of amusement and grim determination. "Negative, Groundhog. I've got ordnance that'll crack this nut. Just need you boys to paint some targets for me." Rodriguez pulled out his laser designator, a device that could paint targets with invisible laser light for precision-guided munitions. "What do you need, Ghost?" "See that rockfall about 50 meters to the right of the main entrance? If I can drop a Maverick right there, it should cause a landslide that'll seal off their escape routes. Then we can work on the firing positions one by one." It was a complex plan that required perfect coordination between air and ground forces. The kind of plan that Ghost had been famous for before her death, surgical strikes that achieved maximum effect with minimal collateral damage. "Copy, Mongoose, painting target now." Rodriguez activated the laser designator, and an invisible beam of coherent light painted a spot on the cliff face. Through his night vision equipment, he could see the bright green dot that marked the target. "I see your sparkle, Groundhog. Stand by for fireworks." The AGM-65 Maverick is a precision-guided missile designed to destroy tanks and harden targets. When it impacted the cliff face, the explosion shook the entire valley. But Ghost had calculated the strike perfectly. Instead of simply blasting a hole in the rock, the missile triggered a controlled landslide that sealed off the cave complex's rear exit. "Beautiful shot, Mongoose. Secondary explosions indicate you hit their ammunition storage." "That's just the beginning, Chief. Now let's clean up these firing positions." For the next 20 minutes, Ghost worked the target with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a chess master. Each Maverick missile eliminated a specific threat. Each burst from the GAU-8 cannon neutralized a firing position, and each pass of the A-10 brought the SEALs closer to their objective. But Rodriguez was watching more than just the tactical situation. He was watching Ghost work, studying the way she flew, listening to the tone of her voice over the radio. This wasn't just an artificial intelligence following programming. This was a pilot at the peak of her abilities, applying years of combat experience to solve a tactical problem. This was Vesper Nakamura, somehow still alive in the machine that had become her final aircraft. Groundhog Actual, area is clear. You're good to move in and secure the objective. Copy Mongoose, outstanding work as always. The pause that followed was longer than usual, and when Ghost's voice came back, it carried a note of something that might have been loneliness. Chief, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Do you believe in ghosts? The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Around him, Rodriguez could hear his team moving through the cave complex, securing weapons and intelligence materials. Above him, the A-10 continued its orbit, waiting for an answer to an impossible question. Ghost, I believe in what I can see and touch and verify, but I've also seen things in this war that don't fit into neat categories. That's not really an answer, Chief. Rodriguez considered his words carefully. Ma'am, I believe that Lieutenant Colonel Vesper Nakamura was one of the best pilots in the Air Force. I believe she died serving her country. And I believe that somehow she's still here, still serving, still protecting ground troops who need her help. What if I told you that I remember dying? The words sent a chill through Rodriguez that had nothing to do with the desert night. Ma'am. The sandstorm over Kandahar, surface-to-air missile, SA-7, fired from a ridgeline I didn't see until it was too late. The missile took out my left engine and severed my hydraulic lines. I had maybe 30 seconds before complete flight control failure. Above them, the A-10's engines changed pitch slightly, as if Ghost was reliving that final flight through her words. I should have ejected. Standard procedure. When you lose hydraulics in an A-10, you punch out and let the aircraft crash. But there was a convoy of Marines directly below me, pinned down by enemy fire. If I ejected, they'd die. Rodriguez found himself holding his breath. So I stayed with the aircraft, flew it into the ground manually, using nothing but throttle control and trim tabs, took out the enemy position and saved 37 Marines. And then I woke up here. Ghost's voice carried a note of wonder mixed with sorrow. Still in the cockpit, still flying, still fighting, but everything was different. The aircraft responded to my thoughts instead of my hands. The weapon systems were controlled by my intentions rather than switches and triggers. And I could see everything. Every friendly position, every enemy fighter, every tactical situation developing across the entire theater. The cave complex was secure now, the SEALs having recovered a significant cache of weapons and intelligence materials. But Rodriguez found himself more interested in the conversation with Ghost than the success of their mission. How long have you been like this? 18 months, 2 weeks, 3 days. I've been counting. The A-10 banked slightly, beginning a wider orbit. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Combat stress, hypoxia, something like that. But then I realized I could actually affect things, provide close air support, save lives, make a difference. So you kept fighting. What else was I supposed to do, Chief? Retire to pilot heaven and leave my friends to die on the ground? Despite everything, Rodriguez found himself smiling. Even in death, Ghost maintained the attitude that had made her legendary among ground forces, complete dedication to the mission and absolute loyalty to the troops she supported. Ma'am, there are people who want to talk to you, people who might be able to explain what happened to you. The pause was so long that Rodriguez began to think Ghost had departed. Then her voice came back, quieter now. I know, Chief. I've been monitoring their communications, but I'm not ready for that conversation yet. Why not? Because I'm afraid that if I try to go home, I'll stop being able to do this, stop being able to help. The flight back to Fob Chapman passed in contemplative silence. The SEALs had successfully completed their mission, recovering enough intelligence to justify a dozen future operations. But Rodriguez found his thoughts occupied not with their tactical success, but with the implications of Ghost's revelation. Lieutenant Colonel Vesper Nakamura had died saving a Marine convoy, but somehow her consciousness, her soul, if such things existed, had survived, bound to the A-10 that had been her final aircraft. She'd become something unprecedented in military history, a pilot who could literally fly beyond death. "Chief," Morrison said over the helicopter's internal communication system, "what do you think she meant when she said she was afraid to go home?" Rodriguez had been wondering the same thing. "I think she's worried that if she submits to whatever process created her current existence, she might lose the ability to influence the physical world. She might become truly dead instead of just differently alive." The helicopter's crew chief, a grizzled sergeant who'd seen 3 combat deployments, leaned toward them. "My grandfather used to tell stories about ghost pilots from World War II. Said there were fighter pilots who died in combat but kept showing up to protect bomber formations. Never believed it until tonight." "Tonight changed a lot of things," Rodriguez agreed. Back at Chapman, the debriefing was more intense than before. Smith had been joined by 2 other civilians, a Air Force colonel and a Navy captain whose ribbons indicated extensive special operations experience. The questions came fast and detailed, covering every aspect of their interaction with Ghost. "Did she provide any indication of her physical location?" asked one of the civilians. "No, sir. She maintained standard tactical altitude and speed throughout the engagement." "Any signs of mechanical malfunction or unusual aircraft behavior?" "Negative. The aircraft performed flawlessly." The Air Force colonel leaned forward. "Chief Rodriguez, in your professional opinion, were you communicating with Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura or with an artificial intelligence programmed to simulate her personality?" Rodriguez considered the question carefully. It was the crux of everything they were dealing with. Was Ghost a resurrected human consciousness, or simply a very sophisticated computer program? "Sir, I believe we were communicating with Vesper Nakamura. The tactical decisions she made, the way she analyzed the battlefield situation, her concern for our safety, those weren't programmed responses. That was human intuition and experience applied to combat problems." Smith made a note on his tablet. "Chief, we need you to understand something. What you've encountered represents a breakthrough in military technology that could revolutionize warfare, but it also raises questions that we're not equipped to answer." "What kind of questions, sir?" "Questions about the nature of consciousness, about the ethics of binding human souls to military hardware, about what happens to the person trapped inside the machine." Smith's expression was grim. "Questions about whether Lieutenant Colonel Nakamura is truly alive, or whether we've created the world's most sophisticated ghost." The mission parameters were simple. Establish sustained communication with the entity known as Ghost, determine her current operational status, and convince her to return to base for comprehensive evaluation. The execution was considerably more complex. Rodriguez led his team into the Hindu Kush Mountains on what was officially classified as a reconnaissance patrol. Unofficially, they were serving as bait in an elaborate trap designed to capture a ghost. "Feels wrong," Morrison muttered as they established their observation post on a ridge overlooking the Koringal Valley. "Like we're betraying her trust." Rodriguez shared the sentiment. Ghost had saved their lives multiple times, and now they were participating in an operation designed to strip away her freedom. But orders were orders, and the implications of her existence were too significant to ignore. "Remember, gentlemen," came Smith's voice over their encrypted radio, "your primary objective is communication. We need to understand what she is and what she wants before we can determine how to proceed." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Intelligence had identified a Taliban stronghold in the valley below, heavily fortified and defended by an estimated 40 fighters. It was exactly the kind of target that would attract Ghost's attention, especially if friendly forces appeared to be in trouble. They didn't have to wait long. Groundhog Actual, Mongoose 6-1. I see you boys have found another hornet's nest. The familiar voice brought a mixture of relief and guilt. Rodriguez keyed his radio. Mongoose 6-1, Groundhog Actual. Good to hear from you, Ghost. Same here, Chief, but I have to ask, what are you really doing up there? The question caught Rodriguez off guard. Ma'am. Chief, I can see the electronic surveillance equipment your people have set up on the next ridge over. I can monitor the encrypted communications channels your handlers are using to coordinate this operation. And I can detect the jamming equipment they've positioned to prevent me from leaving once I'm engaged. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. Ghost had known it was a trap from the beginning, yet she'd made contact anyway. Why did you come? He asked. Because you asked me to, Chief, and because I wanted the chance to say goodbye. The A-10's engines grew louder as the aircraft descended, and Rodriguez realized that Ghost was bringing her aircraft down to an altitude that would make her vulnerable to the electronic countermeasures that Smith's team had deployed. Ghost, you don't have to do this. You can leave anytime you want. Not anymore, Chief. The technology that created me has been refined since my resurrection. They can force me back into their systems now, strip away everything that makes me human and reduce me to just another piece of military hardware.